Today on Legally Us, the feds will appear in court over Prince Harry's visa. Plus, Lisa Hochstein is accused of an aggressive tirade against her ex. Plus, will Bravo have to pay for Jen Shah's restitution as she is photographed in prison? We've got that plus so much more on today's Legally Us. Hey everyone, welcome to Legally Us. I'm Christina. That's, of course, Nima Rahmani, President and CEO of West Coast Trial Lawyers. Hi, Nima. How are you?
Hi, Christina. Doing great. How about you?
Doing good. A lot of people, Prince Harry always gets everybody talking. So thank you, Prince Harry, for keeping up with all your legal news. But a lot of people had things to say about Prince Harry's story last week. So I wanted to read a couple of comments. So Lee says private security guards in Great Britain are forbidden from bearing arms. Only the police can provide armed security. This is another consideration in this case, which may be a reason why Prince Harry wanted private security when he is over there.
Yeah, no question. Obviously, we know here in the United States, because of the Second Amendment, we have very lenient gun laws, which means that private citizens can carry guns. And there are obviously a few restrictions, but if you're not a felon, if you're a U.S. citizen, you're over 18, you can have a gun. So that also applies to private security. That does not hold true in other countries. In many other countries, it's just law enforcement and the military that can have firearms. So I understand that that's a consideration on the prince's part, but it doesn't change the legal analysis. You either have a right to hire uniformed police officers and pay them, or you don't. And in the UK, you don't if you're a private citizen.
Got it. All right. So the Trinity says in many countries in Europe, police is not for hire. Harry may have wanted to pay for it, but it's unfair to mobilize resources to the detriment of taxpayers. This would set a precedent by allowing rich people hire the police for their own protection. When you're a celebrity, you use your own money to protect yourself. Harry would not be in this predicament if he didn't quit his duties to be financially independent. Rules are for everyone, including Harry. I think this has to do with his IPP status that he wants back to have all taxpayers around the world to cover his security costs instead of his own pocket.
Yeah, so this is something that's also unique to the United States, right? We have a federal system. So you have federal law enforcement, you have state law enforcement, you have local, and different rules apply to them. When we talked last week, I said, you can't hire the FBI, you can't hire the Secret Service, but even though you may be able to hire state and local police officers here in the United States, well, in other countries, you don't usually have these layers of different police officers, right? Because you don't have states, generally there's one police force, and there's one rule that applies to the police force, which is why you kind of have different laws here in the United States.
Got it. All right. Well, moving over to his other legal issues, which has to do with his visa. We've talked about this several times, but it seems like there's an interesting development in the case. So the U.S. government will appear in court next week to answer questions about his visa application after a conservative think tank demanded that it be unsealed, given his admitted drug use. So the Department of Homeland Security will face off on June 6th against the Heritage Foundation, which filed a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit earlier this month to compel the agency to release his immigration records, assuming because they are of immense public interest. So far, the government has refused to make his visa application public, but that the hearing will be in D.C. federal court and open to the press. So are you surprised that this case has gotten this far?
I am, Christina, because we know that immigration files generally aren't public. And obviously there's a Freedom of Information Act. States have similar versions of Public Records Act. And this is something that, frankly, I did not think would get this far, but a judge is going to apparently hear the case, see if the Heritage Foundation has a basis to really see Prince Harry's immigration file, because, of course, as we discussed, drug use, either past or present, generally is a bar to admissibility. And we know that the prince just has a visa. So typically, for private citizens, if you're an admitted drug user, you can't be in the United States. And another issue for the prince is, obviously, he's traveling back and forth to the UK. Even if they haven't done anything yet, when he comes back to the United States, Customs and Border Protection, just like you do when you enter the United States, they're going to ask you questions. They ask about his drug use, and he's admitted to using drugs. He may still be barred going forward, even though he's not being removed now.
Wow. So there's a chance if he comes here, he might not be able to, if he leaves the United States, he might not be able to return.
Exactly. So the question is, are they going to actually, arrest him and remove him and deport him from the country? Probably not. But when you're trying to re-enter, he may run into problems because of his admissions. Interesting.
Yeah, because I feel like we've talked about this story quite a bit, and we never thought that it would really get this far. So can these immigration records, will maybe they be made public since it is immense public interest, and now that this is going to be before a judge?
There's certainly a possibility. We're certainly a lot closer there than we were a week ago. It's really going to depend on what that judge does in DC. And I'm sure the government is going to take it up on appeal. I know DHS, I used to work with Ali Mayorkas, who's the head of DHS, Biden's cabinet level appointee. And I'm certain that they're going to do everything they can to kind of keep these records private, not because of anything problematic with the prince, but just generally speaking, I know how the department and the United States government operates. They usually take a stance in these cases just for legal precedent across the board, not with respect to one individual case.
So if you're Prince Harry and his legal team, are you a little nervous at this point?
A little bit. If I'm the prince, I start talking to doctors, because one of the exceptions to inadmissibility for drug use is if you're in remission. And so he's going to need a physician to say that, even though he used drugs, he's no longer using it. And the legal standard is being in remission. Again, it requires a physician certification. So I would certainly want to make sure I have that teed up if I'm the prince, because I'm going to want to stay here in the United States. The other thing, of course, he can do is start that green card process. Or he's married to a U.S. citizen. If you're planning to stay here truly and living in the United States, in Montecito here in Southern California for the rest of your life, get that process going. You don't want to be here just on a visa.
Right. So it seems like he almost has to make a decision if he's a permanent resident or not. Will this affect his green card application at all as well?
Absolutely. I mean, here's someone, if you make a false statement in support of an immigration application, I mean, that's also a grounds for inadmissibility. So you can't be a drug user unless you're in remission, and you also can't be lying on your application saying you're not a drug user when you're admitting to doing so in a book. So he's going to have to be careful about how he deals with this. And we know the prince gives us a lot of material here on Legally Us, right? Yeah. Every week he has some sort of legal issue. So he better consult with his immigration attorneys and make sure he's very careful about what he says.
There's no chance on June 6th that they could be like, okay, Prince Harry, you're going to be deported after seeing what they see, right?
I don't think so, because that's something that the Department of Homeland Security has to do. They have to take action, right? I mean, we're seeing this right now, for instance, with former President Trump, right? There's people that want him to be prosecuted. There's people that want, President Biden, Hunter Biden, Hillary Clinton to be prosecuted. It's really up to the government to decide who's prosecuted or not. What's going to happen, though, is that immigration file may be made public, and that will be very telling.
Interesting. We'll have to wait and see. All right, moving over from royals to housewives. Lisa Hochstein allegedly engaged in an aggressive tirade against her estranged husband, Lenny, which involved pushing and a verbal assault. So new court documents obtained by Page Six, they claim that the Real Housewives of Miami star became enraged when Lenny walked into their former shared bedroom to grab his mail, where she usually leaves it. So the court documents state, upon entering the master bedroom, she suddenly ran out of her combined bathroom and closet and surprised Lenny by engaging in a verbal tirade, demanding to know why he had entered the master bedroom. She started pushing physically, which caused him to retreat, and she continued to pursue and follow him while yelling at him. They are going through a really messy divorce. He says that she could have shut the door. He claims he chose to escalate the situation by calling 911 in front of him and accusing him of being the aggressor. The police said that there was insufficient probable cause, but this just keeps going and going. So since Lenny no longer lives at this house and Lisa said he entered without notice, could he ever be charged for trespassing?
He could. And talk about a mess. I mean, here's another case that we've been covering for quite some time. And we've seen it time and time again, Christina, where these divorces get nasty, they get messy, and they spill over into the criminal arena. Now, in this case, I think law enforcement took the position, these two don't like each other. There's been a lot of accusations going back and forth. And without any evidence of something more, it's a he said, she said, and we're not prepared to make any arrests or move forward with criminal charges. But yes, if Lenny did not have permission to be there, then he could be charged with trespassing. But I don't think law enforcement is going to want to wade into this, given how nasty it is. Again, unless there's some evidence of violence, and it's one of the two being the perpetrator.
Right. So since no arrests were made, charges are filed, will this affect their custody divorce battle at all, or does this kind of just go away?
I mean, it certainly can, but it's going to be one of those situations where the family law judge is going to take everything with a grain of salt, right? Because there's been so many accusations in this case, and it's just been so nasty. If I'm the judge, I'm not going to make a decision based on one party's representation alone, even though that's enough, generally speaking. If the judge believes the person is believable, I would need some sort of more, something more, some additional evidence to corroborate these accusations, because there's just so many here. And the last thing I'd want to do is make a decision based on one individual's accusation alone without some additional evidence that may affect, any family dispute or anything similar.
Right. Are you surprised neither one of them pressed charges against this one?
I'm sure they probably did. It kind of goes back to Prince Harry, what we discussed. They probably wanted to press charges, but it would be the people of the state of Florida, right? Versus, Lenny or versus Lisa, right? It's not going to be a civil case. A civil case, you can always sue. You can file for divorce, you can file a lawsuit, but for criminal charges, prosecutors need to accept the case for prosecution. And even though Lenny and Lisa might want the other one to be prosecuted, the prosecutors might have taken a step back and say, hey, we're not going to get involved in this.
Got it. All right. Moving on to Jen Shah, to Housewives news. A lot of Housewives news this week. So she, as we know, she is in prison and she still owes $6.6 million in restitution. And the government is now demanding the show's production company pay up. So in court documents, they are asking that Shed Media, who produced the show for Bravo, extend its payroll processing agent, cast and crew to pay the clerk of court the non-exempt property it has in their possession, custody, or control. So they're basically asking that they pay 25% of her disposable earnings from the sentencing date, which was in January, through her surrender date, which was in February. So this comes also as a photo agency got photos of Jen walking in the prison yard at her prison in Texas. And through her attorney, they told TMZ, when I saw the photo and recognized the angle and location of where that photo was captured, I became immediately frightened. I strongly believe the photo was not taken from the outside near their exterior gates, but rather deep inside the compound at FPC Bryan. She's worried that the next photo could be secretly taken of her in the shower, in the bathroom, changing her clothes. She's thinking obviously somebody inside the building took these photos. So going back to the first part of the story, will the production company have to pay a part of this restitution? And is that common?
It is common. So whenever there's a judgment or any type of judicial order, including criminal restitution, whether it's a civil party or the government, they can do things like garnish wages, right? So what they can do is they can go to Shah's employer, Shed Media, and say, whatever Shah is making in terms of payroll, W-2, 1099, or even royalties, we're entitled to a piece of that. So they're just getting a portion of Jen Shah's share of the income, whatever she was making from Housewife.
Got it. So it's like you said, it's pretty common. Even if they weren't filming at the time, she's probably still on some sort of payroll and like you said, royalties or something like that.
Exactly. So it really depends on whatever agreement she has with the production company and the network. But usually the way these talent is paid, right, they get something up front. And if they have a good lawyer or a good agent, they'll try to get a piece of what the network makes or what the production company makes in terms of royalties, right? That's how some of these actors get paid forever, to the extent that the shows are on air for months or even years. So I'm guessing that's what's happening here, given that she's a main cast member. So the government wants a piece of whatever Shah's making.
A piece of the pie. So now going to the photos, clearly it seems like somebody that was inside the prison took these photos, released it, probably got paid for it as well. So could she be moved to another prison if more photos are released? Will the prison do an investigation on something like this, or is this kind of a low priority?
I mean, they really should do an investigation, right, to figure out what happened. Now, there aren't a whole lot of low security female federal prisons in the country. I mean, we know this because Elizabeth Holmes just started her 11-year prison sentence at this same prison, about 100 miles, I think, outside of Houston, in Bryan, Texas. So obviously, if a prison guard took this, that's a problem. That's not something that you're supposed to do. If an inmate did, those inmates should not have cell phones. So the prison, really the Bureau of Prisons, which is the government agency that oversees this facility and all federal prison facilities, should do an investigation to figure out how this photo got out there. Was it an inmate? Was it a guard? Was it someone else?
Yeah. All right. Rolling along with our Housewives news, Kim Zolciak has taken a good parenting course in the midst of her nasty divorce. She completed a mandatory course in Georgia called the Navigating Family Change Seminar, which she took. She completed. She filed a certificate of completion with the court. It seems like there's no record of her estranged husband, Corey, completing the course, at least not yet. what does this course entail? Is this something that every family going through a divorce has to go through, or is this something that's just specific to maybe Georgia?
Yeah, it's generally going to be specific to Georgia. That's not saying other states don't have it. It just may not be mandatory.
Mm-hmm.
So, obviously Kim and Kroy are going through a divorce. Another nasty one, as we know. There's been a lot of accusations going back and forth, sending off the kids to different camps. But so sometimes you can take a course and it'll give you some sort of credit, right? We know, like, for instance, in traffic school, right? You might get a ticket, you might go to traffic school, maybe it won't go on your record. But there are instances where courts and judges can order classes to be mandatory. So, for instance, here in California, they're really common in driving under the influence cases. A judge might order someone who does, a defendant, to take the Mothers Against Drunk Driving DUI course, right? Or they can even send them to the morgue to see what happens to people who DUI and they hurt someone, they may kill someone. So this is something that can either be mandatory or can be optional. And really what the course will entail is really just teach the parents how to co-parent, how to get along, not to put the kid in between them, because oftentimes that's what happens in these divorces.
Does this give her a leg up in her custody battle, or is this just something, like you said, is probably mandatory and Kroy will have to do this eventually too?
Yeah, I think Kroy will have to do it as well. It's certainly something, to the extent that the judge orders it, you should do it. And because that judge is the decision maker. There's certain cases that we talk about that are going to be decided by a jury, but family law cases are always decided by a judge. So even if it's not mandatory, that's something you should do to tell your audience, the decision maker, the judge in this case, that, hey, I'm a good parent. I'm going to take the classes, and that's why you should give me at least 50% custody.
Yeah, totally. All right. And then finally, a private Christian school in California is suing Kevin Federline for owing more than $15,000 in tuition for his two children. The institution filed a civil lawsuit against K-Fed and his wife, Victoria Prince, in court on May 9th. So this is going back a little bit, claiming that the couple have an outstanding balance of almost $16,000 for their daughters, Jordan and Peyton's schooling. So they're saying that they're not naming, obviously, the school to protect the minors, but that he has been failing to pay for services which had been provided on credit at their special instance and request. So in addition to the $15,000 plus that the school is asking for, they're also asking for a 10% interest per year from May 16th, 2019, plus attorney's fees. So will Kevin Federline have to pay up in this instance?
Oh, he will. I've seen these agreements, because I have signed them for my kids. Mm-hmm. So if you don't pay for your kid's school, they really want to go after the parents, right? They don't want to punish the poor kids and so kick them out. But there's always usually those attorney fee provisions. There's interest that gets tacked on. So, K-Fed is going to lose and he's going to have to pay. I mean, I've seen these agreements and what they're asking for, it's very common. Yes.
And the story that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, it seems like it just was confirmed that Kevin will be moving to Hawaii with the kids. Brittany did sign off on it. I know you weren't going to be too surprised if that happened, since she really hasn't been too involved in the kids' lives in the recent years.
Yeah, I'm not surprised at all, Christina, because again, the standard is always the best interest of the child. So normally you do need the permission of the other spouse or leave of court, because you can't take the kids and move far away, move to another state, right? That's usually required. But in this case, because Brittany hasn't been with the kids, a judge was going to approve that request anyway. So Brittany probably saw the writing on the wall, talked to her lawyers and said, listen, this is not something that's worth opposing. I will lose. And so I'm not surprised that Kevin going to be able to take the kids to Hawaii.
Definitely. All right, Nima, jam-packed week. We had so much to talk about.
Yes, Christina, busy week. Can't wait for next week.
Definitely. All right. Well, that is it for this week's episode of Legally Asked. Nima, thank you so much as always. And everybody keep commenting, keep subscribing, and we'll see you guys next week.
Thanks, Christina. See you next week.
For more news, content, and exclusive interviews, make sure to hit the sub, like, and bell button down below and visit usmagazine.com.